My name is David Brooks. I work with the Concord Monitor, and I am the moderator of Science Cafe. How many of you have not been to a Science Cafe before? Excellent. All right. Well, then the rest of you have to listen to my spiel again. So Science Cafe New Hampshire was founded 6.5 years ago, actually by a couple of science fans who just basically thought something like this should exist. There are science cafes that actually got started in Europe, more of this sort of like, gathering, the Frenchmen or the Germans sit around and talk about interesting stuff at night at a bar. And it got brought over to the U.S., and these folks thought it was a good idea to start it here. Nobody did, so they started it, and they asked me to join in. And at the time, I was working for the Nashua Telegraph. We started actually up here for a year and a half, moved down to Nashua. We're there for 4 years. And now we've expanded. It's still in Nashua as well. And we've been up here about a year and a half up here in the draft. And the way it works is every month we choose a topic and then invite a couple of extremely knowledgeable experts to come and answer our questions about it. This is not a lecture, not a presentation. Our only rule is no politics and no PowerPoint. So it will be entirely dependent upon your all's questions, so if you don't ask anything, we'll just sit and stare at each other awkwardly for about an hour. It runs through as late as 8 o'clock. We can wind up a little earlier if we need. Let me think. One thing I ask, this is not the easiest venue for the wait staff, especially tonight, because they've had somebody out, so she's pretty much on her own. So tip generously, if you would be so kind. And as I said, this will be on the Concord Monitor, Concord TV website. And it takes about a week to edit it and put it up, so you can go see yourself. And this is the last session for the spring, so to speak. We take July and August off because the weather gets nice and nobody shows up. And we will be back in September. So you can keep up with us. There is, on the table right next to the door, there is actually a sign-up sheet. So if you're not getting our email, put down your name, your town, where you're from, if you don't mind, and your email address, and write legibly, which you won't, but try. I get several bounce backs every time we do this because I can't read the writing on the email addresses. So. But anyway, you'll get our email, and I'll also sign you up for the Granite Geek weekly newsletter that I do for the Monitor. And if you don't like it, you can unsubscribe very easily. And I think that's it for the moment. So with no further ado, here's the way it works. I will basically very, very quickly introduce our two panelists, and they will tell you quickly themselves why we should pay any attention to them. Basically, what their background is, and then I'll ask the first question, and then after that, it's up to you. So, and the topic obviously tonight, actually, there is one thing I want to know. How many of you are here because you saw it in the print Concord Monitor? Okay. How many of you are here because you saw it online in some form? Counting email. And how many of you are here because you heard about it on public radio, New Hampshire Public Radio? One person. Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, our two panelists tonight. I keep forgetting. I'm going to actually act as a pseudo-panelist as well. You're supposed to have a third person who sort of dropped out. So I'm here. I can answer questions or talk a bit about what I call the photophobic science cafes, those in which you don't have to go outside and do stuff on your just basically sit on your computer. I have a reasonable amount of knowledge of those. So, all right. So once again, our panelists are, we have Sara Steiner, who organizes the volunteer lake assessment program for the DES, the Department of Environmental Services for the state, and Malin Clyde, who is the Stewardship Network Director for the UNH Cooperative Extension. So she oversees several of these. And as I said, now speaking nicely into their microphone, they will take 3 minutes or less to tell us their background and why we should pay any attention to you, and then we'll go into questions.
Oh, all right.
Why don't you go first?
I'll go first. Can people hear me? No. Sort of. Okay, I'll talk as loud as I can. So my name is Malin, and I work for the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension. I've worked there for about 18 years, and my focus has been traditionally, throughout my career, working with environmental volunteers. I've worked for land trust and state agencies, and in cooperative extension, I managed a couple of volunteer programs that would train people who are interested in the environment in natural resources topics, so then they could go out and volunteer in their communities. And one thing that I noticed over the years was a real excitement by our volunteers in hands-on learning. And I got interested in citizen science about 10 years ago. It was probably the first time I heard a term from another extension person down in Virginia. And I really saw it as a way to get our people interested in the environment, getting them involved in something that was related to action, but also that learning about science. All the people that I work with are incredibly curious and inquisitive, and they want to know more, but they also want to contribute in some way back because they're volunteers. And citizen science is a really exciting, it's really exploding in the country and actually the world. And so we've started this project in cooperative extension called the Stewardship Network New England that is trying to promote all citizen science projects, and we have about 50 or 60 of them listed in our website that we're trying to promote to all kinds of people like you. So we're sort of taking that, trying to democratize science through these citizen science programs. So I'm really excited to be here. I know a little about a lot of programs, and hopefully Sara will tell you, she probably knows a lot more in depth about her program. So.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Malin. So I'm Sara Steiner, and I work for the Department of Environmental Services. I've been there for about 16 years, and I started off as an intern. So I spent my summers working with the Volunteer Lake Assessment Program. And what we do is we go out on lakes and ponds, and we train lake residents how to collect water quality data. It goes into a larger database of the state, and we look at water quality trends over time. We also look at specific water quality at specific lakes. We can track pollution or identify pollution sources at these lakes and help remediate some sort of pollution by doing this. We have about 180 lakes in the state and about 500 volunteers that monitor those water bodies. And what VLAP, or the Volunteer Lake Assessment Program, does is we combine government with citizen science. So we're promoting a positive relationship between these two things, the government and the public. And it's one of the best parts of my job because I have a really positive relationship with the public, whereas I'm not a regulatory program, so I'm not telling people what to do and I'm not regulating what they're doing. I'm helping them to learn more about water quality, the lakes they live on, and I'm educating them on how to preserve and protect those water bodies. So hopefully over the long term, there's nothing negative that happens there. And if there is something negative, we can identify it and stop it in its tracks. So that's sort of what I do.
All right. Well, as I said, I'll ask the first question. And so I'll start with you. So this is citizen science, and the reason I'm interested in it, and you're right, about 10 years ago I first started hearing the term. It sort of magically came up. And the idea is not just that we're out there and doing fun stuff on a lake or out in the wild, but that we're actually contributing to science. So can you tell me, the people, they gather the data, what is done with it? Who uses it? Is this actually science?
Absolutely. So the data that we collect is what we call valid data, or quality assured and quality controlled, meaning actually the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the federal government utilize the data that our volunteers collect. We also utilize it as a state, and we put it into our assessments of water quality. So we look at how well lakes and ponds can support certain uses, such as aquatic life or recreation. So the data the volunteers are collecting go into that. The lake associations that are supporting the data collection, as well as local governments, also utilize the data. So if we're identifying a problem, the local governments may utilize the data to further assess that problem. Data are also used in creating management plans for specific lakes and ponds. So they go into modeling. So the data are really important, not only for the lake associations and the users of those lakes, the towns who generate revenue from income taxes on those lakes, as well as the state and the federal government who use it to basically assess water quality, both statewide and nationally.
All right, that's it. It's up to you now. We have another microphone being passed around by my charming and talented assistant. I have always wanted to say it. I wanted to be a magician. And I have this one, so raise your hand. If you want to ask a question, we'll bring the mic, and please speak into the microphone like you're eating an ice cream cone. So,
what are the typical analyses that get performed? And I'm assuming that it's done, the analyses are done at the DES laboratory? Okay, what typical analyses are done of these lake samples?
So normally we test for some general chemical parameters. We look at the pH, conductivity, we look at chloride levels, we look at how much algal growth is in the water column. We also look at nutrients such as phosphorus. And then we look at dissolved oxygen, which is how much oxygen is dissolved in the water column. We also look at how turbid the water is, so how much sediment or how much color is in the water as well. We also measure clarity, so how far down in the water you can see, and that gives us a good estimate of water quality as well.
how do you do the clarity water test?
We use a black and white Secchi disc. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it's a pretty neat, it's a pretty simple and very neat way to just measure how clear a water body is. You can do it in rivers, but you have to use a turbidity tube, so it basically has a little Secchi disc on the bottom of it, but it's this plastic tube that you can pour water into to look at.
So if we wanted to find out more about the, the list of the various citizen science programs out there, where would we go to look?
I love your question. So one of the things about citizen science in New Hampshire, but actually everywhere, is that it happens in a lot of different organizations. And when I think of science, when they think of science, where do we think science happens? At the university, right? So the university does have a few citizen science programs in New Hampshire. The University of New Hampshire has a parallel lakes lay monitoring program that does different lakes, but so they collaborate on that. And then we have something called the Coastal Research Volunteer. So the university has a few citizen science programs, but we were amazed when we sort of pulled them all together in this Stewardship Network initiative that was actually funded by a National Science Foundation grant. We got some funding through that to create this basically a hub of citizen science for New Hampshire. There are over 50 programs that are happening in New Hampshire. So you can go to the Citizen Science tab at the Stewardship Network New England website, which is part of Cooperative Extension, and you can sort them by topic. You can sort them by state, because they're from all over New England, and you can sort them by seasonality, and I think you can sort them by the amount of time required. Like, can you do it just one time? Can you do it, is it a seasonal thing, or can you do it all, or, just have a really high time commitment? Because it varies. Sara runs a program that has a very intense time commitment. I would say most of the people probably live on those lakes. Yes, they do. And they have a boat, so maybe not for everybody. But the cool thing about looking at the diversity of citizen science programs that we have out there, there's something for everybody, and there's something that you can do just one time. And it sounds like David knows a lot about there's a lot of explosion of this through internet apps. Anybody want to guess why citizen science has taken off in the last 10 years? Sara mentioned that term, quality control. So that was the big issue in terms of believing that the data that lay people or volunteers are collecting, is it going to be right? Are they going to do it right? Well, and that is an issue, right? It's like people's handwriting. We can't, David can't read your the handwriting for your email address. You might not be able to read someone's handwriting for filling out a paper form, but taking a picture that is geo-referenced, that has where you were and the moment that, has the time that you were there. It proves that you were there, but it also has a photographic evidence of what the turtle looks like that you actually found, things like that. It's just made it incredibly powerful, as well as these apps that let you, instantaneously contribute to a project. So that's been a huge explosion. But these programs in New Hampshire that we have, some are based in state agencies, but some of them based are at the university. A lot of them are based in nonprofits. So a lot of them are sort of buried within a big nonprofit, so you may never have heard of them. One's like, a cool one is the Appalachian Mountain Club. We think of them for hiking and getting outdoors and walking in the woods and maybe volunteering on trails. But they actually have a program, citizen science program called Mountain Flower Watch, where they're trying to engage with hikers to go up and monitor the flowering time of sensitive alpine plants, which of course the only people up there available to monitor sensitive alpine plants are hikers. But that program is maybe, really hard to find on their website, basically. But for people that are really interested in volunteering for nature, that's actually kind of a cool thing. You can hike with a purpose. So if you go to the Stewardship Network New England Citizen Science tab, you can find, I guarantee you there's something that you'll be interested in.
And I will have a compilation of sites and links to yours as well that will be going out at that will be on the grantofgeek.org blog and going out in the weekly newsletter. And so let me actually play panelists for a minute and talk about, as I said, citizen science projects in which you don't have to leave your room, because there's a ton of those, and many of these are, a lot of them are called distributed computing. So distributed computing is where there's something that scientists want to do that takes a blank load of computer time to calculate. And they don't have the budget for a blank load of computer time. So there is software now that will divvy it up amongst a zillion other computers over the internet, and you can sign up to do this. So my incredibly geeky brother, for example, is part of GIMPS, which is the great internet Mersenne prime search, in which it is calculating the highest possible prime number that can be found under a type of prime known as the Mersenne prime, which is under a particular format. And it's very difficult to determine whether a very large number is prime or not. And so they divvy up all these numbers and send them out to 10,000 computers here or there, and they crunch away when you're not using your computer, and it helps them. In fact, the highest prime was recently found. It is 2 raised to the 74,207,280 first power, minus 1. And that was found through GIMPS, and that's the highest prime number known. So there are similar programs that do perhaps more useful stuff, including protein folding studies, which is for drug design. I was looking around. There's one called Grub, which measures the optimum uptime for various websites, which is part of measuring how the internet and networks are working. And there are some that work on cryptography. And I'll be honest, I haven't looked too deeply into these, but apparently you're going to be helping the NAS, or NSA, I guess it is. NSA, decrypt things. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, so those, all you have to do is sign up, download the software, and let your computer run. And occasionally you can go in and check and, pump your fist in the air if you've found a prime number or something. So, and then there's another set of programs that's run by a place called Zooniverse. So you're familiar with Zooniverse? Okay, you guys are familiar with Zooniverse. As in Zoo Universe. And they started out with one program, and now they have at least 100 that I know of looking at it. And these are things in which they get all sorts of data online, often visual, that computers can't analyze well. And the people online can analyze it. So it started out with a galaxy zoo, they called it. So you were going to look at 50 bazillion pictures of the universe that have been taken by all these different telescopes and categorize what you see to help them analyze it to see whether there's a galaxy in there or not. And this worked well enough that a lot of other researchers said, hey, there's all this free help out there that I can get done. And so now they have, I was just looking through the 100 things. One of them actually I participated in for a while is called Old Weather, in which they've digitized handwritten logbooks from British warships in the 19th century. I see somebody nodding, and it's really cool. No, it's actually, well, sort of interesting. And they ask you to go in and read them and type in what you see. And these are things like every hour you write down, what the temperature is, what your latitude and longitude, anything you've seen. And it's really used for historical climate data. So these are British warships that were up in the Arctic, and they were down in the South Pacific, and they were here and there. And you can say that, the average temperature that was recorded by them in this location back in the 1860s was X, and now it's Y, and how does that fit into your models? And it's also useful, as it turns out, for historical research, because there are reports, and you go through these things, and 99% of them are really boring, and all of a sudden there'll be a report about Sailor Jones fell overboard and was eaten by a shark, and the temperature was 72 degrees. So there's stuff like that as well. It's useful. So Old Weather is one of them. There's also one for you search. This is actually fairly new. You search pictures for exoplanets, information about the possibility of planets orbiting stars in other galaxies or other parts of our galaxy. Excuse me. There's one, and I haven't seen this one. That you're being asked. So you look at pictures and you say, yes, that's a piece. Pictures of a beach, and you say, yes, that's a piece of litter on it, and yes, this little bit here is a piece of plastic, and this over here is not litter. And that's being used to train a computer algorithm that will eventually be able to scan huge numbers of photos or web cameras of beaches and determine where litter is and where plastic is washing up, and for trying to help clean it up. So you're training a computer algorithm doing that one. And then there's another one that characterizes bat calls that were recorded by other citizen volunteers in some other citizen science program. They've uploaded all these, wave files of bats squeaking, and you are going to categorize them by certain things that you're very casually trained to see, and then that's going to be used to further for researchers to help do it. So all of this stuff is available again, and I'll have it on the Granite Geek website, Zooniverse. So there's a ton of stuff if you don't want to go outside and join these people and actually do work. So anyway, so that's my spiel. So let's go back to you.
How are citizen scientists regarded by the experts who might eventually go on to write papers or scientific studies in peer-reviewed journals?
It's a gre't question, and it's been a topic of research actually, because that was actually one of the biggest, I won't say barriers, but there's been, potentially you can imagine some resistance from the science community about just what I was saying before, like, what do they know? Which, of course, if you work with citizen scientists, the reality, of course, is that they ask incredibly good questions. They know science needs to be done right. In fact, my experience is that there's incredible diligence, and it's, the people who are interested in this are not, they're volunteering their time to contribute. They take it very seriously. But there is that, there's been questions in Science and Nature, those, big international publications about that very question. And so the citizen science community has responded. It's actually become a topic of research in itself, sort of research into citizen science. There's a new association called the Citizen Science Association, and I just went to their second conference, which was incredibly cool. So people from all over the world coming to talk about some of these issues. And really, with that attention to quality control and quality assurance, it's really been validated in the literature. The use of citizen science in the published academic literature for science has just exploded. So, I won't say it's been laid to rest, but there's been a lot of credibility. And in fact, the National Science Foundation, which provides, the sort of gold standard money for American scientists. They have a special call for citizen science projects that either exist or might exist that are actually employing citizen science and providing, an extra chit into your proposal if you're including citizen science, as well as the fact that the Obama, am I allowed to say that? Like the last administration passed some sort of resolution that required every federal agency in the United States, this has actually only happened about 1.5 years ago, every federal agency in the United States now has to report on their use of crowdsourcing or citizen science in order to get their work done. And so for the Department of Transportation, that might be having an app where people can report potholes and problems on, this is just happening through ways in the internet, and it was essentially a directive to our federal agencies saying, people get on board here. So there's actually a lot of really cool stuff happening in the federal government related to crowdsourcing and citizen science. So, it's really becoming more and more accepted.
I was just going to add to that and say a lot of our citizen scientists are actually retired professionals. They're experts in their fields, and they're retired, and they're giving back by doing this citizen science. And let me tell you, their attention to detail and quality is absolutely amazing. And like Malin said, the use of the data and the expectations are high. The bar is set really high for citizen science.
Sara, is the state funding the volunteer lake monitoring program, or is it still EPA money? And if so, what is the future of the program at this point?
That's a really good question. I am state funded, and I always have been. Yes. So, about every 4 years, there's always a talk of cutting state funds for monitoring programs. But the realization, and I think that we have come to as a state, is that there's absolutely no way we would have the knowledge that we have right now about the good condition of our waters in the state without the use of citizen science and volunteer monitors. We have about 8 to 10 biologists in the state to monitor about 1,000 water bodies, or just lakes and ponds. That's not even rivers, estuarine, or coastal waters. So there's absolutely no way we would have the knowledge we have without this program, and I think that it's recognized very highly in state government. Federally, it's a different story, and that may change the way we do things.
Alrighty, I think we are going to let our panelists go. Please give a big hand to them. For volunteering their time. And otherwise, thank you very much for coming. See you in September.